long before the Bible described Lucifer's fall, before medieval artists painted battles between angels, before the phrase "war in heaven" became part of religious tradition. Ancient civilizations were already telling stories about conflict among the gods. These weren't ordinary wars fought for land or treasure. They were cosmic struggles. Battles that determined who would rule the heavens, who would shape the earth, and what humanity's place would be in the universe. Some of these stories were carved into clay more than 4,000 years ago. Others survived through Egyptian temples, Canaanite myths, and later Jewish writings. Each civilization told the story differently. Different names, different gods, different outcomes, yet one idea appeared again and again. Before humanity fully understood its world, something extraordinary had already happened in the heavens. The question is, were these ancient stories describing the same forgotten tradition, or were they separate myths trying to answer the same timeless question? The first written accounts come from Mesopotamia. The oldest surviving descriptions of divine conflict don't come from Greece or Rome. They come from ancient Mesopotamia. Using cuneiform writing pressed into wet clay, the Sumerians and later the Babylonians recorded myths explaining how order emerged from chaos. One of the most famous is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. Unlike Genesis, creation doesn't begin peacefully. It begins with conflict. The younger generation of gods grows restless. The older gods struggle to maintain control. Tension builds until open war becomes unavoidable. At the center of the story stands Tiamat, the ancient goddess associated with the primeval sea. Following the death of her companion Apsu, Tiamat gathers powerful allies and prepares for battle against the younger gods. Among her followers is a figure named Kingu, who receives authority over her forces. Facing overwhelming odds, the younger gods search desperately for a champion willing to fight. Only one answers: Marduk, the battle that created the world. The confrontation between Marduk and Tiamat is one of the oldest surviving battle scenes in world literature. Ancient Babylonian priests didn't describe it as an ordinary war. It was a struggle between chaos and order. Before the battle begins, Marduk demands something remarkable. If he wins, the other gods must recognize him as their supreme ruler. They agree. Armed with powerful winds, a net, and divine weapons, Marduk confronts Tiamat. According to the epic, he traps her with the wind, strikes her down, and splits her enormous body in two. From one half, he forms the heavens. From the other, the earth. Modern readers often expect ancient creation stories to begin with peaceful design. The Enuma Elish presents something very different. The universe itself emerges from victory after cosmic conflict. Order isn't simply spoken into existence, it's won. Kingu and the creation of humanity. The story doesn't end with Tiamat's defeat. Attention soon turns to Kingu. Having led Tiamat's forces, he is captured after the battle. The gods declare him responsible for the rebellion. His punishment becomes one of the most unusual moments in the entire epic. According to the text, Kingu is executed. Then, using his blood mixed with clay, the gods create humanity. Why? Not to rule the earth, but to carry out labor on behalf of the gods. Modern readers sometimes compare this account with the creation of Adam from dust in Genesis. The similarities are interesting. Both involve humanity's formation from the earth, yet the purpose differs dramatically. Genesis presents humans as caretakers of creation. The Enuma Elish presents them as servants created after a cosmic war. Two civilizations, two creation stories, very different visions of humanity's place in the universe. Was this the first war in heaven? Today, when people hear the phrase war in heaven, they often think of the Book of Revelation, Michael and his angels battling the dragon, Lucifer cast from heaven. But the Babylonian story is far older. That doesn't necessarily mean one story came from the other. Most historians view them as distinct religious traditions shaped by different beliefs and historical contexts. However, both share a striking theme. A conflict among heavenly beings changes the future of both heaven and earth. Similar patterns appear elsewhere. In Canaanite mythology, the storm god Baal defeats Yam, the chaotic sea. In Greek mythology, the Olympian gods overthrow the Titans. In Norse tradition, the gods prepare for Ragnarok, the final cosmic battle. Different civilizations, the same recurring idea. The universe reaches order only after conflict. The Book of Enoch introduces another heavenly rebellion. Centuries after the earliest Mesopotamian myths were written, Jewish literature introduced another dramatic account of heavenly rebellion. The Book of Enoch doesn't describe armies of gods fighting for power. Instead, it tells the story of the Watchers. According to the text, 200 heavenly beings descend to earth during the generations before the flood. Led by Symbolism, they abandon their appointed place and take human wives. Unlike the Babylonian epics, the conflict isn't fought with weapons. It's fought through disobedience. The Watchers teach forbidden knowledge, metalworking, astrology, enchantments. The result isn't immediate destruction, it's gradual corruption. Violence spreads across the earth. The natural order begins to collapse. Within Enoch's narrative, the rebellion doesn't destroy heaven, it damages humanity. That's what makes this version unique. The battlefield isn't the sky, it's civilization itself. From clay tablets to sacred texts, one of the most fascinating aspects of ancient history is how similar themes appear across cultures separated by language, geography, and time. Babylonian myths describe divine wars. Greek myths remember battles between generations of gods. Jewish literature tells of rebellious heavenly beings. Later Christian tradition speaks of fallen angels. Each tradition developed independently within its own religious worldview. Yet they all wrestled with remarkably similar questions. Where did evil begin? Why is the world filled with suffering? What happens when divine order is challenged? The answers differed. The questions remained the same. Echoes across different religions. As civilizations grew and interacted, stories traveled with them. Ideas were translated, adapted, sometimes completely reimagined. The Babylonian exile, beginning in the 6th century BC, brought the people of Judah into direct contact with Mesopotamian culture. Scholars continue studying how this period may have influenced Jewish literature. That doesn't mean one religion simply copied another. Ancient traditions constantly evolve through conversation, memory, and interpretation. A familiar theme could appear in very different forms depending on the culture telling it. A cosmic battle in Babylon became a moral rebellion in Jewish writings. A struggle for divine kingship became a struggle between obedience and corruption. The framework changed. The deeper questions remained remarkably similar. The war that wasn't about weapons. When modern audiences hear the phrase war, they imagine armies, battles, victory through force. Ancient religious literature often understood conflict differently. The greatest battles weren't always physical. They were struggles over authority, justice, loyalty, the right to rule. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers aren't defeated in combat. They're judged because they abandon their appointed role. In later Jewish and Christian tradition, rebellion against divine order, not military defeat, becomes the defining theme. The conflict shifts from swords to choices. That idea would profoundly shape later religious thought. Evil doesn't always arrive through invasion. Sometimes it begins with a single act of disobedience. Did these stories describe real events? This is where history and belief take different paths. For believers, these accounts often carry deep spiritual meaning. For historians, they're invaluable because they reveal how ancient civilizations understood the universe. Archaeology confirms that texts like the Enuma Elish, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the Book of Enoch genuinely existed and influenced the cultures that preserved them. What archaeology cannot confirm is whether the supernatural events described in those texts literally occurred. That's a different kind of question. History studies surviving evidence. Faith explores meaning. Ancient mythology often exists somewhere between the two, preserving the worldview of civilizations that lived thousands of years before us. Understanding that distinction allows us to appreciate these texts without confusing religious tradition with established historical fact. Why these stories still matter? At first glance, ancient battles among heavenly beings might seem distant from modern life, but look beneath the surface. These stories aren't really about divine warfare. They're about order confronting chaos, responsibility confronting ambition, wisdom confronting pride, Every civilization eventually asked the same questions. Why does evil exist? Why do powerful societies collapse? Why does humanity repeatedly struggle with knowledge, authority, and conflict? Ancient writers answered those questions through stories powerful enough to survive for thousands of years. That's why these myths continue being studied today. Not because everyone believes them literally, but because they preserve humanity's earliest attempts to explain the world. The legacy of the first heavenly conflict, whether it's Marduk confronting Tiamat, the Watchers descending to Earth, or later traditions describing the fall of rebellious angels, each narrative reflects the same underlying belief. The visible world isn't the whole story. Something greater lies behind it. Ancient civilizations didn't separate the spiritual world from everyday life. To them, what happened in heaven shaped what happened on earth. Kings rose because the heavens allowed it. Floods came because cosmic order had been disturbed. History and theology were deeply intertwined. Even today, those ancient ideas continue influencing literature, religion, art, and popular culture around the world. Did ancient tablets really describe the first war in heaven? In many ways, yes. Long before later religious traditions recorded their own accounts of heavenly conflict, Mesopotamian civilizations were already preserving stories of battles among divine beings. The Enuma Elish tells of Marduk's victory over Tiamat. The Book of Enoch describes the rebellion of the Watchers. Later biblical tradition introduces its own vision of conflict between heavenly forces. Each story belongs to a different culture. Each reflects different beliefs. Yet all of them wrestle with the same timeless mystery. How did order emerge from chaos? Why does evil exist? And what happens when those entrusted with power choose rebellion instead of responsibility? Perhaps that's why these stories have survived for thousands of years, not because they all tell the same history, but because they all ask the same questions. And even today, humanity is still searching for the answers.